Hey Photo World, Take and Talk Pics. I'm Rob Kruger and this is episode 69. Today we're going over the exposure and kind of talking about how we can do equivalent exposure, because we can find our way there to the exposure and that's great, but what do we want to do if we have different choices we want to make, and cleaning it up on noise from ISO, or getting a longer depth of field from Aperture, or a faster shutter speed because those sports are moving too quick. So what do we do? Well, let's take a look. I got a little chart written out here of just a few things of ISO and the shutter speed and aperture. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but it's up here, and I'll kind of walk you through. We have our ISOs ranging in full stops from 100 up to 3200 for this purpose today. Our shutter speed is starting at 1/4 of a second all the way up to an 8,000th of a second. And then our aperture is starting at f1.4, moving up to f32. So we have a few different things, and let's just take, for example, we're outside. We have our ISO set to 200 for whatever reason. And our shutter speed is showing us, hey, there's plenty of light out here. We're going to be at 1/250th of a second. And we're going to be at not quite our sunny 16 that we hear about, but it's more or less f8 today. So for our purpose, we have a shutter speed of 1/250, f8, and 200 ISO. But f8 is a little bit longer depth of field than we actually want, because we're doing a portrait and we want it to be nice and have that shallow depth of field look to really bring our subject off the background. So f8 is not going to cut it. What can we do? Well, let's just start with moving our aperture. We're going to go down to, let's say our lens will allow f4. Boom. We're going to come down to f4. So what did we do there? We went 2 stops on our aperture to open it up, get that much more light, 2 times again. Wow, this is super bright now, and we have a improper exposure. So what can we do to change it up? We have a super bright exposure. Well, for one thing, let's clean up our noise. Since we have ISO 100, let's take it down to ISO 100. Boom, that's 1 stop. We can stop worrying about that. All right, so we have 1 stop to make up here, and this should be pretty easy now. What do we do this way? We can open it up, slow it down. That's going to be brighter, so that's the wrong direction. Let's bring it over here to make up that 1 stop. And now we can cancel that out. We have a new exposure, but equivalent to our previous exposure. And our new exposure will be ISO 100 to 1/500th of a second and f4. Say we're having a really extreme situation and we go inside, we do this, and then all of a sudden we realize, oh my gosh, we got that awesome portrait of the basketball player outside. Now we're going to do it during game time. You turn on your camera and these are your settings. You're inside, it's darkly, poorly lit, a little bit yellow. We can worry about that in the future episode, talking about color and white balance. But for now, we're seeing it's too dark. We meter just in our cameras and it's going, you're 3 stops or more underexposed. So what do we got to do here? Let's look for 3 stops. Well, we decided that for this purpose, our lens had a limitation of f4. So we're going to stick there. All right, we're 3 stops dark or more. Let's find out. A true meter would read 4 stops. Oh no, so we got a big gap to fill. Well, when you're doing fast shutter or high speed kind of things like sports, it's not exactly high speed photography, but it is a faster pace, and you want it to be more in focus and sharp when they're jumping through the air, making the basket or passing it to the next guy, because things are moving really quickly. So what you can do is you can work on your shutter speed and make sure you find where you want it to be. Now, a safe shutter speed to make sure you're getting fast enough would be to start where your flash sync speed would be. A lot of consumer cameras are going to be around 200th of a second, which is a 3rd stop off here. But for our purposes and talking full stops, we're going to talk 250, which is more of the prosumer and pro camera kind of level that will give you a flash sync speed of 2/50th of a second. Irrelevant with today's wireless and doing high speed photography, but for the settings of the camera, the way it's set up, 1/250th of a second. So now we we open up a stop, right? So we're opening up by 1 stop. That gets us 1 of those, 4 that we need. Wow, I cannot draw that direction. Let me try that again. Boom. The 4 that we need. Now we're down to 3 stops to make up. All right, let's get there. So we have to keep it at f4 because that's the most open this lens in this scenario will allow. We're going to disregard these other apertures here. We want 250 at least, because that's our flash sync speed, to make sure we have a fast enough shutter to catch the action. We got to make up 3, and we're at ISO 100, which means we have some latitude here. Today's cameras, they offer a pretty good ISO range. This camera right now for the video is actually set at ISO 1600, and the quality is quite clear. So here we go. Let's get those 3 back. 1, 2, 3 all the way up to 800 ISO. Look at that. That's not that bad. 800 ISO, 2/50th of a second, and f4. Now we're getting some awesome pictures. Let me do a real life scenario right here. I have my little mirrorless Olympus camera here, and there's just some junk on the table out in front of me here. But let me quick set up the camera, see where my settings are dialed into, and make sure we are good to go. Looks like I have it correct here for today's purpose. We are pretty open, actually. At f3.5, it's not a full stop. It's actually just a third off of that. So f3.5 is where we're at, and 1/20th of a second, and ISO 200. Boom. There's the picture. It's not an amazing shot or anything, but it is properly exposed. And to me, it looks a little dark, but because of the way the camera reads and how it gets tricked with dark and light things and how they mix, it can tend to shoot a little bit dark or a little bit bright and not give you exactly what you're probably looking for. So let me meter the way I meter and see fit for things. There we go. So here's that new exposure. And what we did there is we raised up the ISO a bit and changed up our shutter speed to make up a little bit of a difference and make it easier. And there it is. We got a better exposure. So yeah, so there's that first one. Yeah, a little dark. It's there, but it's just metered in the middle and kind of boring and dull. And then that second one, it's a little bit more rich and vibrant. And these are right out of the camera. They're not, anything going on here, no editing. So they're right out of the camera here for you. So I have an exposure. It's actually 3.5 for the aperture and a shutter speed of 1/40th of a second and ISO 800. Let's see. I want more in focus. I want a little bit smaller aperture, a bigger F number. So I'm going to dial it down a little bit. I'm going to go to f8. Okay, and you can even count it if you don't want to draw out a chart or anything. You can count the clicks. It's that amazing. So here we go to f8 from 3.5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are in thirds of stops, so it's 7/3 of a stop away, which is 2 1/3, right? Full stops away, and then we can do something else. We can change up our ISO and go. Let's take the 7 there. 1, 2, 3. You know what? I'm going to stop at 3 for the ISO and say that's good because I won't push past 1600. So we finish it up here. 1, 2, 3, 4 on that shutter speed. So now we have a 15th of a second, ISO 1600, and f8. Let's see where that puts us for the actual image. Here we go. Very nice, and that image stabilization of this camera is really awesome. But here's that first picture. Yep, and then the second picture. Very nice. See, they're the same, but totally different exposures. You don't have to draw out this chart to go with. You can count the clicks and keep it going. Play a little bit. See what you get. Take and talk pics. I'm Rob Kruger, and happy shooting.